Okay, so we want to look at some things about site selection. When we're looking for a place, we don't always have a lot of choice, but it's nice to have it close to the garden, easy access to the house where we can just care for it well. We need to think about water. If we need in an area where irrigation is especially necessary. And we want to think about the amount of sunshine that the area gets. Some of the fruiting crops, they all need full sun. Some of the ones that are the greens, some of them can handle partial shade. But it's generally necessary to have an area that is full sun. And then we want to think about the fertility of the area if we have a choice. And one of the things that I've found is that any soil can be improved. It can be, we worked in the southern part of Utah where we just had pure sand for 9 years. And there we invested a lot in the soil, and Steve will be dealing with steps to productive soil. But what I've found is that any soil can be improved. We had an area in Colorado that was right in front of the elementary school, and it had a granite shelf underneath it and granite gravel on top. And that area, the alfalfa never grew very high, only about 6 inches. But it was right in front of the elementary school, and I wanted the kids to be able to look out and see their garden right there. So in the fall, I plastered it with sections of alfalfa bales, about 1 compression of the baler thick. Tilled that in the fall, and in the spring we planted it, and we had just a lush, fantastic garden. So that was really encouraging. Here you can see, just by observation, you can see some of that broom grass there, the yellowish grass. So that gives you an indication that the soil is quite acidic there, and it will need some lime in order to bring it up to proper pH. So, and here we can see, just by observing the color of the soil, it can give you some indication. I just got back from Colombia, South America, where the soil in the tropical cloud forest area, it was about 7,000 feet, and the soil was very black and just everywhere, and it was beautiful. Black doesn't always mean fertile. We're living near Houston now, and there they have black clay, and it's very gummy and very hard to work when it's wet. But here, generally, you'll have, if it is black, that'll be your topsoil, and as you get down, you can see the clay is red, and here is, we want to think about the slope also. Is it going to be an area that is well drained? So here it's nice and level. This actually had a very nice loamy soil, and we could grow some great crops there, Chinese cabbage and other things like leeks that that took a lot of oomph to keep them growing well. And here you can see just a nice slope. If it's toward the south, that's preferable, and that way you can get into the garden earlier in the spring. If it's getting the sun, it's a south-facing slope, that will be ideal for early spring. You want to avoid areas that are wet. It doesn't show up too great here on the picture, but a marshy spot there. Plants don't like wet feet, so you want to choose an area that has proper drainage, or make provision to get the area drained. Even if you needed to put in some drain tile, if you don't have too many choices in where you can move the garden to, you can put in some perforated 4-inch drain down deeper than where your tiller will be, and drain the area so that you can still use a given spot. Okay, we're going to go into garden planning, and I think did all of you get a Johnny's seed catalog? Back on the table here, they also have some other seed catalogs: the High Mowing, the Seed Savers Exchange, and Territorial Seed Company, and Seven Springs Farm. So I really like the Johnny's Seed Catalog because it's kind of like in many ways, like a gardener's encyclopedia. And if you open it up there, you'll see on any given page, you'll see in a green box the cultural factors for that crop. So it will give you the kind of pH that the plant does well in, whether it likes the soil to be acid or alkaline. It will give you the potential diseases that will be a problem with that plant. It will give you the potential pests. So like, if you're looking at the one on the cabbage family, you're going to have potential problem with the cabbage looper. And so it will help you to realize that you need some dipel on hand to deal with that cabbage looper. And then it will help you to know what kind of harvest you can expect to get, and the average seeding rate, and also the temperature at which the seeds will germinate. So how warm the soil has to be for the seed to germinate. Anyway, there's a lot of really helpful information there. So we'd like to encourage you, if you have a question, we really want to address your questions, but if you can hold those to the end, and we will get your questions though, okay? The time to do your garden planning is in the winter when the snow's blowing, or even in the fall when your mind is fresh from the last year's trial and error, things that you need to that you want to get that you didn't have last year. And so make your planning well in advance. And I like to, for those that are just beginning and even advanced market gardeners, a plan is essential. And what I usually put it out on graph paper. And there's many different plans you can make, but lay it out so that you have it all out there. You want to have your variety that you want to plant. You want to have the date that you plan to plant it, and the feet of row that you're going to be planting. That will help you then to calculate the amount of seed that you're going to need, and get your order in early so that you'll have it when you need it. If we're planning to have perennials, we want to put them off to the side of our garden where they will not interfere with our annual plants. So like your strawberries, asparagus, blackberries or raspberries, you want to have those, or comfrey, artichokes, you want to have them to the side so they'll be out of your regular annual area. And another thing that for those who are just starting, especially if I'm moving to a new area, I like to find some local seasoned gardener that I can gather information from. And this is invaluable. By doing that, you can determine what your season schedule is going to be, when the last frost is in the spring generally, and when the first frost may be in the fall. So those are important dates to know, and with the weather changes, that will fluctuate some. But you can also go to your county extension agent for your county. Every county in the states of the U.S. have a county agricultural extension agent office, and you can go there, and they will generally have recommended planting dates, and you can use those as a guideline as you're getting started. And as my brother will be sharing about season extension, by using some of these other approaches for season extension, we can push the limits. But for what you plant in an area where you're not protecting it with plastic, those recommendations will be very helpful. Another thing that you'll want to keep in mind is the spacing of your plants. There's some things that work very well in beds, and those would be like any of your salad material, beets, lettuce, kale, broccoli, those type of things. I generally plant them in beds, 32 inches wide. And then other things work well to have in rows, like the corn, it needs a spacing of like 36 inches, 32 inches, depends on what kind of, how you're going to cultivate between the rows. If you are cultivating it just with a stirrup hoe or by hand, then you can plant closer together. But if you're going to be using like a Troy built, then you need to consider how wide your machine is, and then have a little bit of space for the row. So if I'm using a Troy built, I'll usually have the rows spaced at 32 or 36 inches. Then for melons and winter squash, they sprawl out, and you need to space your rows plenty wide, because they will sprawl out, and you'll need about 8 feet between the rows on winter squash and on watermelon and cantaloupe. On cucumbers, you can go with just about 4 feet. The other thing that we want to keep in mind is that in your garden planning is that some of your plants will go for the whole season. They're long season crops. That would be like your tomatoes, eggplant, peppers, corn, and then we'll have some that are shorter season. It would be like the salad material and like peas. So in your planning, you want to plan so that you kind of group the shorter season things together, and that way you can follow it up with a successive planting that will utilize that ground after that is finished. And so in your planning before the season and in your ordering of the seed, you want to keep that in mind also. Okay, so here are some of the ways that we group the crops together by hardy, semi-hardy, tender, and very tender. And this would be related to the time that we can plant them. So the very hardy ones, or the time, how long they will go into the fall. Because the onions, we can start very early. We can set them out very early, and they can handle, and peas, they can handle some frost. And anyway, all the ones on the left side there, radish, spinach, lettuce, and carrots, they can handle a little bit of freezing. And the semi-hardy, beets, broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, kale, potatoes, and Swiss chard, they can also take some frost, but not real hard freezing. They would need some protection on if it's freezing very hard. But they actually, many of these greens get tasting a little better with some frost. So that's really nice. And then the tender ones, cucumbers, green beans, summer squash, sweet corn, tomatoes, they can't tolerate frost. And the very tender ones, cantaloupe, lima beans, okra, soybeans, squash, sweet potatoes and watermelon. They need the soil to be nice and warm. And eggplant, peppers, tomatoes, they need the soil to be nice and warm before you plant them. So I generally will start my garden with the hardy and go to the tender and work my planting that way. That way I can just keep working my way right across the garden. What is a hard freeze? Well, a hard freeze would be, for the semi-hardy, would be like down in the mid-20s. Yeah. But they can easily take just a light freeze, a few degrees below freezing, no problem at all. And in your garden planning, one of the things that we want to look at is rotating our crops so that for several reasons we want to rotate them so that the same plant family will not be in the same place year after year. We want to do that for disease control, and so we want to have diversity, botanical diversity. We want to have, we don't want to have the nightshade family in the same place year after year. That would be tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant, because they have the same tendency, they have a tendency to the same diseases. So if we are planting them in the same place year after year, we're going to have a lot more disease problems. We want to plan so that we vary where we plant the different things because of their nutritional needs and because of pest and disease problems. And we want to alternate legumes and non-legumes. So the varieties that are in the bean family, peas and beans, will be soil builders, and then we have the rest of them that are not going to be building our nitrogen levels. And long rotations are better than the short ones, and then it's a great benefit to have a year of rest. So we want to group crops that like to grow together according to their soil nutrient demands. We want to group the botanical families because of the insect and disease problems. And as we were talking about how we plant things in the beds, that will also influence our grouping of things together. So as far as the nutrient demands of the plants, we have heavy feeders on the left, which would be the asparagus, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, corn, cucumbers, eggplant, kale. So the big leafy things are the heavier feeders. They're going to take a greater quantity of nitrogen in order to do well. And then we have winter squash, summer squash would be in that, okra, pumpkins, leeks, so the nice big leafy things. Then you have the light feeders, beets, carrots, onions, parsnips, potatoes, radishes, rutabagas, sweet potatoes, Swiss chard, and turnips. These don't require quite as much nitrogen and are able to do well. Then you have the soil builders. Anything that is in the legume category takes nitrogen out of the air and fixes it on the nodules on the roots. And so by rotating these, the soil builders are able to fix nitrogen that the next year we follow with the ones that are the heavy feeders, and then we follow that with the light feeders, and then we come back to the soil builders. So this rotation works well to help keep your soil built up. Another thing that Steve will be sharing is interplanting with leguminous crops that will also, like clover, that does wonders to help boost your nitrogen levels, and you don't have a problem with the lack of push in the heavy feeders then. Okay. Yeah, on the rest year, on the handouts that are in the website, and we'll also have a slide on it here that shows the incorporation of the rest year. But oftentimes what we'll do is 2 rotations of this soil builder, followed by a heavy feeder, a light feeder, another rotation of soil builder, heavy feeder, and light feeder, and then follow those 2 cycles with a rest year. By looking at the plant families, it can help you make decisions in regard to disease control, particularly. It's also nice in regard to pest control. If you have it all together, the plants that you will need to spray or watch out for cabbage loopers, you have those all together. So we have the beets, the chard, and the spinach. They are all in the goosefoot family. And then you have the daisy family, which are chicory, dandelion, endive, lettuce, sunflowers. And then you have the cabbage family, or the brassicas, which is broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, collards, kale, all of that family. They're considered the brassicas, or the cabbage family. And then you have squash and cucumbers. And then the grains, barley, corn, oats, rye, wheat. And then the legumes, which would be alfalfa, all your beans, clover, lupins, peanuts, peas, and soybeans. Then you have the lily family, which are your onions, garlic, leeks, chives, and then buckwheat, and the rose family, which would be your brambles and strawberries, and then the nightshade, which is eggplant, peppers, petunias, potatoes, and tomatoes. So this family in particular has diseases that we need to break up the disease cycle. And so we want to have them in the same, we want to not have them in the same place year after year. So we want to make as much of a gap between when they're in the same spot one time as when they're in there another time. So we want to have at least 3 years, and it's better to have more time before you'll have the nightshade plants in the same spot again. Otherwise, you'll have a lot more fusarium wilt and other problems. And then you have the umbellifer family, which are parsley, carrots, dill, and turnips. They have the nice flower that is like an umbrella, like the dill, you know. And the hover flies, they love to dance from one umbellifer plant to the other, and they are a great friend of the gardener. So by keeping in mind these plant families, it can help to guide you in your rotation, especially so you're not getting the nightshade in the same place repeatedly. Okay. Here we have one layout. And when we're planting our sweet corn, we always want to have 4 rows together so that it will help with the pollination. When the wind blows the pollen, it will give, if you have a 4-row block, then it will enable the ears to be properly pollinated so you won't have blank spaces on your cob. Here we can see some of the things that we're planting in rows there at the top. So at the opposite end from the sweet corn, we have squash, cucumbers, and summer squash. And then we have 2 beds that have the salad type material in them, followed with 2 double rows of peas. I generally like to plant my peas in double rows. That way they will, you can have, if they're climbing peas, you can have a fence in the middle to support them. If you're in an area where it's very hot, though, I have found that growing them more densely will help to provide, they will help shade themselves, and they can handle the heat better that way. Another thing that you can do is in the middle of the day, and I've done this in southern Utah with the salad material and with peas in the middle of the day from, say, 12 to 2 to run a misting sprinkler, or you could even have it so that it comes on more often for short periods of time, and that evaporation will greatly cool the plants and can help them to tolerate the heat. So here we down on the next rows, we see the cabbage family grouped together, and then beans, so they'd be your soil builders, and then potatoes, tomatoes, which would be the nightshade family grouped together. So here we can see what we would want to do is the following year we would move group 5 down to section 6, and we would move section 4 down to section 5. So we would just move it into the next, move it down one, and you would be having your heavy feeders following the soil builders and the light feeders following the heavy feeders, and then repeat with the soil builder. Okay? And then here you can see in this plan, on the 7th year, you would have a rest year. The other thing we can see here is that where the sweet corn and the squash are, you can also swap that end for end so that you're not having the sweet corn in the same place as the year before. And here's a statement from Fundamentals of Christian Education. It says, "There is much mourning over the unproductive soil, when if men would read the Old Testament scriptures, they would see that the Lord knew much better than they in regard to the proper treatment of the land. After being cultivated for several years and giving her treasure to the possession of man, portions of the land should be allowed to rest, and then the crops should be changed." So here it really helps us to understand the value of letting that soil rest as a means of making it more productive. And that wouldn't necessarily have to be all of your land at the same time, but by means of rotation, being able to have that rest time. Okay, are there any questions? Yes?
What if you have a 60 by 120 lot in which your house is, and you have only a couple areas that you can grow things in, and we like tomatoes?
Mm-hmm.
How long can you put tomatoes in one place?
Yeah. What if you have a very limited space and you love tomatoes, you're wanting to grow tomatoes again and again? Still, if at all possible, you need to rotate it. One of the ways that that is sometimes used in greenhouses where they're growing a lot of tomatoes is to tarp the area so that they're using the sun to help increase the heat, and by that means diminish the disease that is carried from one year to the next.
We've done that. Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah. And we've also found that growing clover is just a great way to really energize the soil with a lot of activity that helps to minimize your disease problems. So that might be something to consider in some of the other ground.
Oh, thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah. On your year of rest, do you put a cover crop in there?
We usually do. If you look in nature, it's always trying to cover the ground, even if it's with weeds. And so we will generally grow clover, and then that will just transform the soil texture, and it will boost your nitrogen levels.
Is there a particular clover that you prefer?
There's so many different kinds, and some of them do fix a little bit more nitrogen than others. So I usually just look at the amount of nitrogen that they fix and try to get ones that will fix a greater amount. So you're saying if you're growing very intensively and you, how do you deal with the rotation? If you're growing it in pots, then you would want to be careful about maintaining the same soil, especially when you're growing nightshade. But for most of the others, it's not a problem. You can just incorporate more soil amendments that will boost your nitrogen, like alfalfa pellets or compost, and you can use the same soil. But if you're using that soil repeatedly with nightshade, you'll have big problems. There was the comment that they have a greenhouse where they grow tomatoes year after year, and to deal with some of the disease potential, they just take the top 3 inches off and replace that with compost, and it has seemed to work well for them. And he was commenting, could that be done during the rest year? I believe it could be. Sure. I generally have wanted to grow something that's going to really boost the microbial activity in the soil and also boost the nitrogen levels. Modify what?
The soil, the sand.
Oh, okay. Good question. My brother Steve, he's going to be dealing with steps to developing productive soil. And so he'll really cover that well. How to get that sand or clay up to par so it's productive. Yeah. Yes, that can be done either with grow light. The question was, can you grow significant quantity of food indoors, and would it be healthy? You can just use soil that you have put together, and by using grow lights or even just regular fluorescent lights. You can grow microgreens. We're not going to be covering microgreens in this seminar, but there's another one that's especially focusing on microgreens. So you can set up a shelving with these flats of microgreens.
By the window, if you want to use sunlight?
Sure, if you have a window, but just having a window is not going to be sufficient unless it's a greenhouse type setting. And so you will need some additional light. Otherwise, they'll be very leggy. Yeah. Yes. The question is the advantages or disadvantages of drip versus sprinkler. Drip irrigation really helps minimize your disease problems in some of the crops where, especially in parts of the country where we have high humidity and very high temperatures. And sprinkler when we use drip irrigation, it will minimize our disease problems like powdery mildew and some other things. With sprinkler irrigation, it's nice for the salad material. It will help keep it cool, and they love having the moisture on their leaves. Especially if you live in a desert area. I found it worked really well in southern Utah. The other plant family that can be especially problematic is the nightshades. If you're using sprinkler irrigation for them, it will tend to really foster the diseases that we have in the tomatoes. Yeah. I don't have a lot of good scientific answer to that. It's just a decision that you have to make on your own. But I think the goal would be to work toward growing them from scratch yourself. It's a great experience, and then you can also have the varieties that you want, and you can know exactly how they were grown. I know that there are some, compromises that I wouldn't make, and so there again, I think growing our own food is the best way to go, if at all possible. But yes.
Would you please repeat the question for the recording sake? We're not getting the question.
Thank you. So the question was, should we be concerned about the way that food labeled as organic is being treated? And I think that it is a concern, right? And what about the nutrition level in that food? Yes, I think that you can grow food organically by the guidelines, and it still not be packed with nutrition. Okay. Any other questions? So it's time for a break, and we'll 15 minutes till our next class.